Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, monimi luanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and so very honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is James Holmes. He is here to celebrate Scare Squad and to talk to us about the modern monsters our kids face today. Before we invite James into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Chandler the Crocodile, a beautiful picture book that celebrates diversity, encourages self-love, and spreads kindness, and was written by Grace Estelle. As Chandler the Crocodile's first day of school unfolds, he experiences the unfortunate realities of looking different. His sharp teeth, long tail, and leathery skin scare his furry classmates, making him an outcast. Join Chandler's journey to embracing his gifts and making a friend. This book is a great fit for babies, toddlers, and early readers. You can preview Chandler the Crocodile and buy the book right now at graceestelle.com. Join us right now from the Orlando area and the state of Florida. Our guest today is here to celebrate. I'm really excited. He has published a series of 22 books that introduce us to modern monsters that actually exist in our kids' lives. Please welcome to the show, James Holmes. Hey, James, how are you?
Hey, Jed, thanks so much for having me on the show.
I'm excited to have you on the show. You know, we talk a lot about, we have this group of authors who comes on a lot, the spooky middle grade authors, and we talk about, you know, kids loving spooky stories and how monsters can help kids kind of face their fears, facing them in a book. But I don't take the time to think that there are actually monsters in our kids' lives every day. Talk to us a little bit about this.
Well, I think the scariest story you could probably ever tell a kid is open the newspaper. So, you know, and that's the modern world that we live in. Everything is a consistent bombardment of terrifying information all the time, whether it's coming from social media or it's coming from the news. Kids live in a dangerous world, and they're constantly being bombarded with all this information. So the idea that I had after spending 25 years in the news industry and consistently regurgitating all of this bad news on a consistent basis was to take these scary things and to turn them into monsters. So I dealt with adult themes, things like school violence and abuse or alcoholism, bullying, social media influencers, all the things that are kind of taking our kids. And in each book, I turned that into a monster. And then I created these 5 kids. They make up Scare Squad, which is the name of the series of books. And Scare Squad goes up against these monsters. But along the way, what they really learn is that the imaginary monster, the boogeyman, the monster under the bed is kind of, it pales in comparison to the real life threat. So for instance, in one of the books, it's called The Man with No Face. It's a man that literally comes out of a screen and sucks you into the screen, which is exactly what happens to every kid. I mean, we continuously hand over some type of device to a kid, and it's become the modern babysitter. And in the process, we're losing our children. Mm-hmm. And so every monster mimics that. And the threat is that in each book, more and more children are disappearing across the earth. So more and more kids are being taken, which is exactly what's happening in the real world. We're losing our kids. And the concept here is that the adults can't see the monsters. So the kids in Scare Squad actually have to go up against them and fight the monsters because the adults, like in real life, we can't actually really see the monsters, right? We're literally, feeding them our machine. Here you go. You're making too much noise in the back seat. Here you go. I mean, the adults in many ways are contributing, to a lot of the problems here. Yeah. So the idea was to kind of take this and give it to children in a way that was fun and entertaining and funny and scary, and yet hopefully a lesson that they can walk away from and go, ooh, I don't want the man with no face coming out of my cell phone tonight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I forget who it was that said it, and I know I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but basically it was, we don't write about monsters to let kids know that they don't exist. We write about monsters to let kids know that they do exist, but that we can beat them. And
Right.
I think that's exactly what your books are doing.
I hope so. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I really tried hard not to make it easy on them because I don't think the modern world makes it easy on them. So, for instance, I have a book 10 called The Slim Reaper, and it's about a guy that shows up at the front door with a fast food bag, and he goes into poor neighborhoods, food deserts, where there are neighborhoods that essentially they don't have a grocery store, they're poor families, they can't afford basically a decent meal, and he goes in and he preys on these particular kids and goes in with an endless supply of fast food. And then he goes in and it basically sucks the life out of them, which is kind of like what the modern fast food industry is doing, right? We pump them full of fat, we pump them full of grease, and then we're literally sucking the life out of these kids. And what I wanted, though, is not an easy fight. So at the end of that book, without giving too much away, one of the main characters has diabetes because she has been eating so much of this garbage that she's wrecked her body. And that is a consequence that she kind of has to deal with now through the rest of the series because, the real monsters, you may win, but you don't escape. And it was also important for me that even if they beat the monster in one book, like in real life, that doesn't mean you beat all the monsters. The problem is if I have one Slim Reaper in one book, that's great. We beat junk food. That's terrific. We solved the problem. So the series, you have to read every book because it is building towards a very large climax. And essentially, there's a lot more of these monsters. There's tens of thousands of things that are Slim Reapers or tens of thousands of sea screamers, which represent alcoholism. And those are hard themes to tackle in a kid's book, but I think that, they're harder themes to tackle in real life. And so if we're not giving our kids these tools to kind of recognize some of the threats, then we are the adults who aren't looking and seeing the monsters.
Yeah. I started my career 30-something years ago presenting educational magic shows, and the first theme that I was asked to address was the issue of drug abuse. And initially I thought, I'm presenting a Say No to Drug show to first and second graders. Didn't make sense to me at the time, and lots of suburban school systems wouldn't have anything to do with me. We don't bring that up with our kids. But I realized that the time to talk to kids about these issues is when they're younger, when you can start giving them the education so that they have the knowledge that they can use to make healthy choices when they're presented with these different monsters in their lives.
I think it's really easy to be an ostrich and just put your head in the sand and pretend this stuff doesn't exist, I mean, but that's not really what it means to be a parent, right? You have to get dirty. And I mean, from 25 years of doing news and being in broadcast, the broadcast industry, there's a lot of heartbreaking stories that I would have to deliver. And I would have to go home and I would really just want to hug my children because it was such a heartbreaking day. But the idea that we are, that we're not preparing them, that we're not giving them the tools because, they're too young for it, I don't think that's really equipping them for the modern world. Because if not you, then somebody else will. And one of the points in the book is that the adults don't see the monsters. That's why these kids have to keep going up against them because they're the only ones that see it, much like real life. It's real easy to turn your face and, give your kid your cell phone and let them just kind of parent themselves. But, parenting's a dirty business. It's hard work and you got to get your hands dirty. And so that was the idea behind the books is that these kids basically, they're going up against the monsters. The adults can't see them, but we have it incumbent upon us to educate them that this is the real world and you are going to face these threats.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that parents haven't fully grasped yet, some do, but I don't think enough parents fully grasp that we're giving our kids a window into the world. You mentioned the machines. These machines, these devices that almost every kid is carrying around in their pocket, are giving kids access to information that none of us would have had at such a young age, 15, 20, 30 years ago. But they're also giving others access to our kids, whether it's the predator that wants to communicate with our young kids, or if it's just the alcohol company that's selling alcohol. And they might not be consciously thinking when marketing to 10-year-olds, but some of the things they sponsor, some of the music videos that their product shows up in, it's marketing that message. This is cool. This is something you should aspire to. And every kid is watching music videos on YouTube, and it doesn't matter what kind of blocking you put on your phones or your computers. Kids can get around it.
Get them young.
Yeah.
And we are feeding them to the monsters.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we are turning them over essentially to the monsters. And that's really what this series of books is about, is that the adults, you want to think that you're the big, brave dad and there's no monster under the bed, but that's a lie. It's a lie, because the truth is the monster is in bed with your kid all the time. And we have handed it to them. And, there's a TED Talk essentially about how many steps it takes to get from a YouTube video where you've got, dancing chipmunks, and in 5 steps, all of a sudden you're watching something that, a child should not be watching. And it's a real easy, just kind of step down. And we think, okay, this is easy. I get 10 minutes apiece. And I empathize. I mean, I'm a parent of 3. We homeschool. It's crazy. You want 10, 20 minutes apiece to be able to do a load of laundry or put some dishes in the dishwasher. So I'm just as guilty. I could go downstairs and my son's probably on a video game right now. But the point is that we have to be more conscientious, because the access, the Pandora's box, is far deeper and much more vast than it's ever been before. I mean, you could have grown up, in the Middle Ages, and the world could have been falling apart around you, and you probably would not have known it, right? But now you're consistently bombarded with it. And the things that are reaching out of the screen to grab you, the music that you're listening to. One of the books is called You've Got Earworms, and it's all about explicit music that basically makes these kids do wild and crazy things, which is exactly what it does. So, I mean, what I've tried to do is personify these modern threats. And I'll be honest with you, I really thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to run out of books. And I wrote 22, and I've got plans for at least a dozen more, because the world just keeps pumping out monsters.
Yeah. Now, you were sharing with me before we started recording that the series was kind of inspired by a conversation you had with your daughter.
Yes. The first book is called Clown Town, and it's all about bullying. And she actually had the dream, essentially, that began the whole thing. I don't know what she ate for dinner that night about clowns that are terrorizing a bunch of kids at a spooky circus. But we wrote the first book together. And it was actually kind of humorous, because she's 11 years old. It's the perfect target audience that I was looking to reach. And she was ruthless. Like, you think an editor is tough? Get an 11-year-old. And make her your daughter, because then, the gloves are off. But she'd be like, Dad, this is dumb. Nobody talks this way. So I'd have to go back and rewrite it. But the most important lesson I learned here is that I said, well, let's do this book together and have some fun, do some daddy-daughter time and really bond. And she's like, fine, I get 50%. It's like my editor and my agent all in one, So
that is a kid who grew up in a showbiz family.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I was like, geez. Ideally, you're probably end up getting 100% anyway. You just don't realize it.
Tell me, what of the 22 monsters that you wrote about, what's the one that scares you the most?
I would say the man with no face, which is the monster that essentially represents the faceless entity that is in the screen. I think that's the most ruthless threat. And in the books, the main character name is Bailey. It terrifies her the most. It also gave me an opportunity, though, for these kids to have a reason not to have electronic devices, because this man with no face can become the man with no face, and he can basically crawl out of anything. So if it's a screen, he can crawl out of it. Cell phone, computer screen, whatever it is, television. It doesn't matter. And to me, that was the most realistic world threat, because that's the one that's literally going to come out, grab you and kind of, pull you into the screen, which is exactly, what's happening in the real world. But it gave me a great way to get the kids to ditch their cell phones, to ditch their computers, to avoid all televisions, to be able to shut down. And then all of a sudden, because they end up traveling cross country, kind of going from place to place and trying to help save some of these kids who have gone missing, they're like getting to learn how to open a road map, right? And I mean, just kind of these like primitive skills that you and I grew up with. But for them, it's a whole new world, right? To be able to experience life kind of in a primitive manner, I suppose. Mm-hmm. The Slim Reaper was another favorite of mine because all the kids basically have to get rid of junk food in their diet because they're so, turned off by the possibility that this guy may show up again. And so the fridge ends up turning all green and filled with vegetables, which they hate. But at the same time, they hate him more. So they're like, I guess we're having carrots for dinner.
I love those two topics. One of the things that helped me immensely as a dad was when my kids were kind of entering middle school. It was I just happened to be taking a class in media literacy. And it really opened up my eyes to the fact, now this is probably 15 years ago that I was taking this class. And at that time, I was shocked to learn that kids are exposed to 3,000 media messages every single day. Now, again, that was 15 years ago, before smartphones, before digital billboards, before. So now I would say 10,000 messages every day. And every one of those messages were created by somebody to get our kids, to get us to do something, whether it's to buy something, to think a certain way, to act a certain way. And it was really important for me to understand that and to pass that information on to my kids. And I think that my kids became much wiser consumers of media because of that, because they grew up with that knowledge. And I think that's something that your book is going to be able to help parents and kids do.
I hope so. I mean, look, I think every author in some way that probably comes on your show is going to say that they want to get kids to read again. And that's obviously a great goal to have. But it's become a crisis in America because a lot of these kids are just being bombarded and inundated with that messaging. You remember the movie Minority Report where Tom Cruise walks in and they're like scanning his eyes to be able to personalize the ad for him? I mean, that's exactly what's happening. You just don't get your eye scanned, but your cookies and your browser history and all that is being used against you, maybe even more, I mean, who knows what's being monitored and listened to. But the idea is that I wanted kids to get into the book, to get off of the machine, and even Kindle. I didn't want Kindle's great. I love Kindle, but I want them to smell the pages. I want them to open the book because that has almost become a foreign concept. My kids were at we did some travel before COVID, but we did some travel, and even then, in airports all across the country, my kids would have books and they'd be lined up in the seats at the airport waiting for the plane. And it was surreal how many grown-ups would come up to me to talk to a stranger at an airport, which is weird in itself, and would say to me, "It is so incredible to see your children reading books." And that broke my heart because I love books. I love to read. I love to be, the experience and to be able to take you in this exotic and foreign journey. But they're not doing that anymore. And it's become this short attention span theater. It's swipe right, swipe left. Oh, I don't like that. I'm done. But a book is a commitment. It's a relationship. And that's what you need to survive in life. Oh, I don't like my marriage. I'm going to get rid of it. No, I mean, it's it's a fight. It's a struggle. It's work. And that's why I like books. That's why I wanted it to be 22 books that if we really added the numbers together, it's 2.5 full-size adult novels. But then, when I break it up into bite-sized morsels, hopefully it'll be an incredible reading experience for the kid. But, it's been a long time since Harry Potter was really, really big with the kids. It's been a long time since I think the whole world turned out to read a book. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's a magical experience to be captured in that environment where all of a sudden time slips away. And I don't know any other experience that's like that. I mean, even Netflix now. How many people watch Netflix with, a cell phone in hand, screen to screen to screen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. One of the other things that I love, you mentioned, one of the monsters that you mentioned was the Slim Reaper, I think you called him.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that I've been in those food deserts. And I've visited the schools where those food deserts exist. And I go into the schools and 75% of the kids are obese.
Right.
Some morbidly obese. And first, second, and third grade. And I know that's not the majority of the country, but I want every kid to understand that this is happening so that we can all do something about it and make that change so that we can make sure that our brothers and sisters living in those parts of the country have access to good, nutritious food.
Well, that's part of the problem is that this guy in particular, I mean, he's ruthless in some ways because fast food is non-discriminatory. It doesn't really care what side of the railroad tracks you come from, right? I mean, because it's so appealing and it's quick and it's ready and it's cheap. So in the book, there's two children essentially that fall victim to him, and one of them is in a food desert, and the other is not. Mm-hmm. And it was important for me to kind of show that it's not necessarily an economic issue, mm-hmm. right? I mean, obesity is an American problem, and we have kids from all walks of life that, because it's so readily available and it's so easy, are just pumping this stuff in, and we have either single family homes or we have two working parents, and there's just not enough time to be able to go do a 1950s style home cooked, meal every single night of the week. And so we fall back on this. And so yet again, another opportunity to be able to have this kind of character, prey on children's lives. But I was a little weary as to how far I wanted to take a lot of these monsters, because being in journalism for so long, believe me, if I could show my children with my eyes what I have seen, they would change their entire outlook on existence. But school violence mm-hmm. was a big theme. And I knew that was something that kind of haunts children. They are taught how to hide under a desk. And this isn't the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? This is a real guy that can come into your school and he can do these horrific things. So we're talking about it kind of in an abstract way over here, but we're really not having the real conversations necessarily about it. And so one of the books is called The One Who Takes, and it's about school violence. It's about children. One kid walks out and all the other kids are gone. Mm. So it's the last day of school, and he walks out of his classroom and all the kids in the school are gone, which is tragically kind of what we see, right? And the idea is to kind of mirror that experience. And there is a child who's walking the halls that he doesn't recognize that ends up being this kind of ghost kid. But the backstory is that he was severely bullied, and which unfortunately becomes the theme for a lot of school violence cases. So the idea here is to kind of mirror some of these headlines and put it in a way, the books are scary to me as an adult, not because of the made-up monster. Mm-hmm. It's the monster when they put the book down. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that scared me the most.
Yeah. Well, this is, our podcast is all about encouraging families to read together with their kids. And I think this is a series that families should absolutely read together, not necessarily read out loud on the couch, but reading, co-reading, sitting down and talking during those family dinner times, on the way to soccer practice, on the way to ballet class, on the way to school. What a better thing, instead of handing that device to your kids to keep them quiet, engage them in a conversation. And these are some great topics to talk about.
Well, if you want a whole list, it's at scaresquadseries.com. And it says, "Hey parents," and in it is all of the themes of all 22 books that we tackle. Mm-hmm. And they're not easy subjects. We do it in a respectful way so that it caters to children. But I hope that it brings about a conversation with parents and children to be able to say, you know what, no matter what, I'm going to take care of you. You're safe.
Yeah. Excellent. Before we go, James, I just want to we are living in the United States and in lots of places around the world, in a time when we are more polarized than ever. And I think a lot of that there's a lot of blame to go around, but certainly the news industry, the news media has something to do with feeding that polarization. What can we do as consumers to kind of not get sucked into that hole?
That has become increasingly difficult. I mean, those are the monsters that are taking adults, because we have more bias now in the industry as a whole than I've ever seen. And you look back at the history. I mean, yellow journalism and entire wars. The Spanish-American War was essentially created to sell newspapers. So it's not like it's a new concept, but it's never been so widespread. There are literally a billion channels where you can hyper-focus on your particular ideology and your particular belief system. And that can be really dangerous, because that, to me, is where we get zealots, right? You have somebody that becomes a disciple, essentially, of only that one stream of thought. And what we're seeing now is more and more of the networks, more and more of the blogs, whatever they are hyper-focusing on that one little voice. And a lot of times they're amplifying a voice that otherwise would not be heard, or that is a voice maybe we shouldn't be listening to anyway. And so that's become a very dangerous entity. And the industry as itself is so fractionalized and so marginalized that they're desperate. They're just reaching out for anything they can grab to be able to get eyeballs on screen. I think what you can do is consistently question what you hear. Because everything you're being told now, I used to believe that the truth, that I got into the industry to find the truth. I don't know what the truth is anymore. I don't know if there is a truth. All there is perception of data. And it's your job, okay? It's no longer the media's job because they're failing at it. It is your job to be able to determine whether you're being lied to.
Wonderful. That is perfect. I thank you for that. I think that's very, very important. As we're guiding our kids through, we need to also be aware of what influences are leading us, and are they leading us in the way that we want to go. So thank you very much for that. James, please remind everybody where they can go to find out more about Scare Squad.
So scaresquadseries.com, that's our website. You can take quizzes, find out which member of Scare Squad you're most like. You can order any of the 22 books. It's on Amazon. It'll be Barnes & Noble at the end of the week. And it is doing really well. I'm very, very pleased. So we're number one in some of the categories on Amazon. And you know what? The best part is I got to write it with my daughter.
Awesome. We've had a great, very eye-opening time speaking with the author of the Scare Squad series, James Holmes. Hey, James, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jed.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be S.F. Banks. He'll be here to celebrate You Can Have It All, a really great magazine for young people. You don't want to miss it. Hey, I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, James Holmes. Be sure to check out Scare Squad. Also want to thank our sponsor, Chandler the Crocodile by Grace Estelle. Hey, a big thanks go out to my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.